We were originally gonna today was on our regular schedule was going to be Sarah Waxman of At the Well. We have a wonderful partnership with At the Well where they come, especially on Rosh Chodesh or around the new month, the new moon, to do a special sit. And we decided that in light of this weekend's events that we wanted to change things around a little bit. That wasn't the right theme for today, and so. Instead, I'm here. Um, and I'll just share, very I don't have a text prepared for today. Um, I don't think it's telling anybody who's here is probably aware of the really horrible news that came to us over at the end of Shabbat about the murder of the six hostages who many people have been praying for, especially known to many people was the face and the identity of Hirsch Goldberg Poland. I have a local relationship to the Poland family members of my synagogue, and yesterday morning, about 100 or so folks were gathered together. I went for Shacharit, and then we watched the funeral live streamed in the sanctuary. And I was gutted. I sobbed. And I felt so much for Hirsch and for his family, and for all the families of all the hostages and everybody who's lost life and loved ones. So many people have suffered in these last 11 months. And I think a lot of people I've seen, some conversations online anyway about, well, why all of a sudden now, and why this person, why not, so and so and so and so. There've been so many people who have died, and I think that tells us something really important, that what Hirsch's family succeeded in doing was being able to put his story, the name and face and voice with something that we think of in maybe general terms. Those of us who don't have a personal relationship with particular stories, they were able to put a particular face and voice and story to this tragedy. And many of us became really connected with that. And so we could feel the pain. And then you multiply that pain, which is infinite, by, just hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands. And it's really overwhelming. I saw someone ask a question of me online the other day. How do we pray? Like, where do we go from here? And my mind went to the story of Aaron losing his sons, Nadav and Avihu, and the Torah there in Parshat Shmini with the line Vayidom Aharon, that Aaron was silent. And we use that, those of us in the rabbinic trade, sometimes to acknowledge that there aren't words, and not every time is a time for words. And sometimes there are just words that we don't have words to contain, to express what we're feeling. And I would add to that, I think that there's also, as I've taught several times this year, I think there's different types of silences. There are silences that are silence of absence, silence that feels like we're hollow and diminished. And then there's also silence where we can feel a silence that is presence, a silence that that envelops us and invites us in and invites us deeper. And we may be able to experience both of those things at the same time. And so what I'd like to do is just invite us today to try to be present in that silence together. That there aren't really words to say for many of us right now, and that's not what we try to do here at IJS. We don't make political statements. That's not our thing. We're really trying to create a space where everybody can come together and be silent together, to be present together. And so I'd like to do that with this set and invite you to join me. And hopefully that can be in some way comforting to those of us who are experiencing pain. Um, and it might also be a form of tefillah, a form of prayer, um, that uh, that the violence ends um, speedily, and it's already been too long and too much, and that as Rachel Goldberg Poland yesterday said in her eulogy, that Hirsch's death and the deaths of everyone who has died and suffered in this entire horrible um, conflict might become part of something larger that leads to something better. So, um, with that, I'm going to invite us to sit together, and I'll guide us a little bit. And so, if you'd like to assume a meditation posture that is good for you, if you're sitting, that's dignified and upright, or if you're lying down, is awake and aware, or if you're walking, you might be walking as you're listening. But just to convey being a little more awake, a little more aware, not rigid, awake but relaxed. And if you haven't yet, you can soften your gaze or close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. And try to bring some attention to your breathing. Just deepening the breath, if that's good for you. And with each exhalation, just trying to bring a little more relaxation. If you're experiencing agitation, just to try, even with these initial breaths, to feel a sense that you are not alone, that you're held here in the embrace of this community, of everyone who is here now, of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence that is here amidst and among us. You might allow your attention to focus on the ways in which you are supported right now, supported by your body, supported by a chair or a floor or a bed or the ground. And just that basic awareness of being supported, being held. Just try to look through your body, noticing any places where you might be carrying additional tension. And just try to bring some softness to those areas if you can. maybe particularly around the forehead, around the eyes, and the cheeks and the jaw, the shoulder blades, and the belly. To bring some tenderness, some softness, any place you may be carrying some of that additional tension or anxiety. Down through the sit bones and the thighs, the knees, the calf muscles, into the ankles and the feet, and out, down into the ground. And what may be most helpful, I don't know about most helpful, what may be helpful right now is just one of our simplest practices about the theme of tshuva, of return, that's appropriate for the beginning of Elul, but is always appropriate. Really, I find is always helpful. It's just to allow our awareness to come to rest on the breath, if that's comfortable for you, or on another anchor, if that works better. And just to be aware of breathing in when we're breathing in, to be aware that we're breathing out when we're breathing out. Just to make a kavanah to stay present with that sensation, to be aware when we're breathing in that we're breathing in, when we're breathing out that we're breathing out. And then when we become aware that our attention has wandered, just be this wonderful moment to offer ourselves chesed, compassion, as we're aware that, oh, my attention wandered from my kavanah. My attention wandered from my intention. And then very gently a lot of love for ourselves, we can choose to bring our attention gently back to our anchor. And that is the process of tshuva, of setting an intention, missing the mark, most often inadvertently, unintentionally, and then with a great deal of chesed, being able to bring that back, bring ourselves back to our intention. And what I love about this practice today, in particular, is just the invitation to open our hearts to chesed, to loving connection, to be aware that this breath, the gift of this breath, is always available to us. That when we feel constriction, tightening our breath, tightening our muscles, tightening our feelings, that it's possible to take a breath. It's possible to be present with the breath. And for me, being present in that way softens just a little bit some of the pain or difficulty I may be experiencing. Can be a tool for not feeling the pain of the second arrow, our own resistance to our negative emotions. And instead, just being mindful and aware that, yeah, there may be pain here, there may be anger, there may be frustration or a sense of helplessness. And even in those very difficult emotions, there is still the ability to be present with this breath in and this breath out. In the book of Psalms, we have the verse that contains the words, Imo anochi betzara, that the Holy, Infinite, Eternal One is with us in our most constrained, constricted times. And this practice of being present with the breath, for me, allows me to feel that. Even when I'm feeling that constriction, even when I'm feeling in the narrowest place. There's also a possibility for some expansiveness, for some release. Tomorrow, officially, we begin blowing the shofar for Elul, leading up to Rosh Hashanah. And normally it's not my practice to blow the shofar on the first day of Rosh Chodesh. It's the last day of the month of Av, as I mentioned. But I think it's appropriate today. And so I'm going to blow the shofar, and we'll still have a couple of minutes still to sit with the sound. But the shofar that I have here is my father's shofar, and it starts, like all shofarot, starts narrow and ends in expansiveness. Let's just sit with the sound of the shofar for 2 more minutes. We can close with the prayer that the cries that so many are crying today can awaken all of our hearts to compassion, to justice, to shalom, to peace in the month of Elul and in the year to come. Your eyes have been closed. I invite you to open them when you're ready. And we'll put the text of the Mourner's Kaddish up. If you have anyone you are holding in mind or heart today that you'd like to recite, that you'd like to include as we say Kaddish, you're welcome to do so in the chat. We'll open up the chat here. There we go. Thank you. Thanks to Rachel, who's on our tech today. And you're invited to also unmute yourself and join me in reciting the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal, Kadash, May Rabba, Alma, Divra,
Pirute,
Makute,
Makute,
Zayechon,
Zayechon, Yomechon, Tayet, Beit Yisrael,
Gala, Ubizman
Gala,
Karev,
Ubman Karev Yimei,
Hey, Shmei Rabba
Shmei Rabba
Mevarach,
Mevarach,
La'almei Almaya,
Le'almaya,
Tabach,
Tabach,
Ar
Ar
V'Raman,
Raman Vietnaseh,
Ikadar Elam mikol
Shirata,
dirchata,
Sava Nekamatanda, Amiran, Bioma, Vimru, Amin. Shlama Rabba Min Shmaiha,
Shemaya
Nim
v'chaim
Aleinu
aleinu
Vyom
v'al
Yisrael, Vimru, Amen.
Shalom
Shalom,
bimrama, shalom aleinu,
Shalom,
v'al Yisrael.
Vyom Kol
Kol
Yisrael,
Yeshvei
Kol
Tevel
Yoshvei Tevel, Vimru, Amen.
Amen.
Say shalom bim ramahu say shalom aleinu val kol Yisrael val kol Yishvei tevel bim ramin.
Amen.
All right. So thank you, everyone. If you need to leave us, we wish you tzeitzchem l'shalom, farewell. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same channel, but we always leave some time now for your observations and your questions. What I would just ask is this is not a place for political conversation. If you want that, there are lots and lots of places to go. But I would please ask you to refrain in the chat from talking about about what needs to be done, about any actions particularly that need to be taken or by whom, your sense of the political atmosphere or who's politically responsible. As I said, there's lots of other places to get into that. If you'd like to talk about your personal experience, about what you're holding right now, which is, for me, I will say, really complicated. Absolutely. Welcome that, but just please try to speak in the first person. So thank you. And thanks everybody. Thank you, Jenny. Okay. Thank you. I'm glad this was good for a lot of people. Thank you. I see Deborah's comment there. Yeah. And if you have a question, if you want to phrase something in the form of a question, I'll do it. Well, this is going to be Ask the Rabbi, basically. But if you have a question, please type it in the chat and just put all caps question before you write it. That would be really helpful. I see Heidi's note here, which is gesturing towards a question. I'm finding it hard to get enthusiastic for the high holidays. I'm trying to figure out how to approach them. Yeah. And Laura here, I feel so overwhelmed. How do you go forth and be in the world with such grief and so many emotions? Laura, there's a lot of wisdom, obviously, in the Jewish people's probably two greatest ritual creations were Shabbat and Shiva. And we're those of us who are not direct relatives, in the technical sense, are not sitting Shiva in that way. But it feels like so many of us have been, in one way or another, in a state of, some people have said, the state of aninut, the state of between when a body, someone dies and when they're buried, which is, its own state, and then the state of being a mourner. And I think, Laura, I mean, I would welcome other people's wisdom here in the chat. I think there's permission in that to give ourselves time and space. There's that we don't have to. We need time to for grief to metabolize. And that's been so difficult for so many people, especially people who have been living directly in so much trauma. And the kinds of practices that we do, I feel just even this little practice today, hopefully it's one small tool where our emotions, the overwhelming emotions, do not have to be the entirety of what's governing us. Yesterday afternoon it was Labor Day, so my son didn't have school, and he hadn't seen Inside Out 2 yet. And all summer, since he'd been home from camp the last month, he's been saying, let's go see the movie. And we hadn't yet. And so we had nothing to do yesterday afternoon. So we went and saw the movie finally. And if you haven't seen it, really recommend it. Um, uh, but one of the things that movie really just does beautifully is um, shows, how our anxiety, in particular, that emotion, can overwhelm the rest of our system, and then how we can make space for the totality of our emotions, and that is so much part of what it is to be uh, held. Sorry, so much part of what it means to be an adult and being able to hold all of these emotions. And so, yeah, I find that's helpful on a regular basis. If you yeah, I'll pause there. Deborah, I'm not related to, thank God, I'm not related to any of the hostages, but in a direct sense. Michael, I see that your question here about, is there a particular prayer for lessening anger? It's really interesting, since we have Rosh Hashanah now sort of officially on the radar. Um, there's a line in the Talmud, in the Tractate of Brachot, that talks about a prayer that uh, that we recite, that winds up actually being part of the traditional Rosh Hashanah liturgy, um, where it says, just as Abraham conquered his, or conquered, I think he conquered his Yetzer, his inclination, at the moment of the Akedah, of binding Isaac, that, like, he would have wanted to, not do it, but he, like, got himself to the point that he could. Weird, I know. But then it says, Kain yichbeshu rachamecha al ka'ascha, that we ask that God's compassion overtake God's anger. So set aside the first part about Abraham. That's the mechanics of it. We can work that out. The more interesting part to me is the second half, is a prayer that we pray that divine compassion overcome divine anger. And we have other statements, obviously, in the Talmud about, in our tradition, about, just as God is El Rachum v'Chanun, just as the divine is compassionate and forbearing, right? Doesn't anger quickly. So we should be the same, right? And so I think that's very much part of our practice, right? That's what the practice of prayer is, in some ways. When I say Ashrei, the Ashrei prayer, Psalm 145, one of the lines that I linger on when I say Ashrei, that I focus on, is Chanun v'rachum Adonai, erech apayim v'rachas. No, Chanun v'rachum Adonai erech. Why am I blanking on it? I say it every day. Anyway, the Chet line, Ugdal Chesed, erech apayim Ugdal Chesed. God is Chanun v'rachum, is gracious and compassionate. Is long to anger, and and is full of chesed, is full of mercy, full of compassion. And for me, for years, that has been the one line in Ashrei that I really sort of lean into most heavily, because I'm aware of my own inclination to being short-tempered, like I could be, or my anger could get the better of me. Hard to believe, I know. But that's why we work on these things. And um, And so I think these prayers are all over. There are lines in our liturgy, and I encourage you to go through, a Siddur and find, it could just be one line that you say to yourself at a moment where it helps, that it can help. So, Molly, I see your question here, building on Deborah Furtick's question. Deborah comments that she has a lot of anger towards God, very much like our feelings about the Holocaust. Can you comment on that versus being angry at the humans that have brought this about? Where's the responsibility? Yeah. Yeah, and just to clarify, it's the members of our shul are the aunt and uncle of Hirsch, and his grandmother. Responding about God's anger, or about anger at God, I should say. So I come at this, I'll say, like, theologically, for me, I think once I learned about the Shoah, I needed to move to a place where I don't believe in that God is actively involved in in making decisions about minute details about who lives and who dies. And we can talk about what that might mean in the context of Rosh Hashanah and Unatana Tokef later. My wife and I started that conversation in the car on Sunday. But I have to sort of reinterpret that for myself. Um, uh, in this case, to me, there's no question that this is an entirely human creation, right? We know who killed these hostages. We know it's human beings who are killing each other. And uh, so I don't experience for myself anger at God around that. I see much more godliness for me in the extraordinary um, resilience and love and open-heartedness of Hirsch's parents, right? To me, that's much more evidence of God and God's existence, and how the divine operates in the world than killing. So. I mean, so that's the move I've made, but and there's a lot more behind that. Um, what I would say is also maybe part of the answer there too is one of the things we don't talk about so often, I think here, at least on the sits that I'm part of, is that one of the basic orientations we have at IJS in our Torah that comes out of Hasidism is a notion of non-dual theology. So not that God is something separate and some unmoved mover or some being that is separate from the universe and created it, but that God is very much in the world, in the universe, and that the world is permeated with divinity, right? It's suffused with divinity, and that we uncover it and we reveal it and we make it known to ourselves by attuning to it. So that to me takes away. It's an understanding, it's a theology that moves me in a different place where I don't find I'm angry at God in that way. I could be angry at lots of other things, and certainly at human beings, but that works for me, and we can say more um, about that if you want. Um, just reading through some more of the comments here. Yeah. Glad to see a lot of people are, yeah, a lot of good comments here. And someone points out in non-duality, human beings are part of God. Yeah, and God is part of us, right? So we all have, we all have divinity, divine sparks within us. And so yes. And so that means that, just as we say, Baruch Dayan HaEmet, blessed is the true judge, that the divine is present in all of this, but how that is, I actually, I mean, I think Rachel Goldberg Colin yesterday, I think it spoke to this, that this is part of something, that one way to make sense of that is that there's something much larger that is here that we don't all fully intuit and understand. And to remember that, which is, not to minimize the loss, but is a way of helping to continue going, right? To continue on. So, okay. All right. I think I'm going to stop there. A lot of theological riffing today. I really, really appreciate everybody coming, joining today, and I'm glad this could be a good space for you. I hope it's helpful. And for the rest of the week, I hope this is helpful to you and to everybody else. And yeah, just wishing all of us some nechama, some comfort, especially to those who are mourning. And may our people and may all beings not know no further suffering. So thank you so much. And we'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same channel. Thanks, everybody.